Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Scott Ritter, and Scott is going to talk about a piece he wrote a couple of weeks ago on his blog about Jamie Raskin, and the fact that would you say he was a Nazi sympathizer?
Well, I think if you look at the record today, he is the one who on April 28th of this year got on the floor of the United States Congress and chastised a Republican representative, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for daring to question the money that was being allocated to the defense of Ukraine, daring to say that, this money is going to be used to fund Nazis. And he, with all the indignation that Jamie Raskin could bring to bear, said, "There is no evidence of Nazis in Ukraine. Show me the evidence. Show me the evidence," he chastised her. "Show me the evidence. There are no Nazis in Ukraine." And he was wearing his blue and yellow. He was all in. And he's a lying sack of manure because Jamie Raskin knows there's Nazis in Ukraine. How do we know that Jamie Raskin knows? Well, because Jamie Raskin voted for amendments to the Department of Defense Appropriations Act that funded, assistance to Ukraine, an amendment that said you cannot use U.S. taxpayer money to fund training for the Azov Battalion. Why? Because they are a white supremacist group with neo-Nazi affiliations. And then Jamie Raskin in 2019, I believe, signed a letter to then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying, "Why haven't you put the Azov Battalion on the foreign terrorist organization list? Why haven't you, classified them this way? Because why? Azov Battalion is a white supremacist neo-Nazi group." Raskin's on record calling the Azov Battalion a white supremacist neo-Nazi group. He knows who they are, and he has said, we can't allow U.S. taxpayer money to go under and underwrite their training. He said it, and now he's the one standing on the floor of Congress saying, there are no Nazis. Let this money go. It will never be able to train Nazis because there are no Nazis in Ukraine. Jamie Raskin is a hypocrite. He's a liar. And moreover, this is a guy on the same day, April 28th, he put out a tweet about Holocaust Remembrance Day. Holocaust Remembrance Day. So Jamie Raskin's there wrapping himself in the shroud of, I will never forget. And no one should ever forget. I'm not saying this. I'm not mocking the Holocaust. I'm saying, my God, you're a guy who knows what the Holocaust was. You know what happened to the Jews in Europe. And yet you're sitting there pretending that Ukraine doesn't have a Nazi problem when Ukraine has elevated to national hero status Stepan Bandera, an ultra-nationalist, pro-Nazi thug whose supporters pulled the triggers that killed 30 to 40,000 Jews in Babi Yar, a suburb of Kiev, Ukraine. Jamie Raskin is a disgrace, literally a disgrace. This man should be hounded out of office. I don't believe in tar and feathering anymore, but if I did, Jamie Raskin should be tarred and feathered. Put on a pole, strip naked, pour hard tar on his body, throw feathers at him, and march him right the hell out of the United States Congress, out of Maryland, out of the United States. I believe that if we still were able to revoke citizenship of Americans, he should be revoked and sent to Ukraine, where as a Jew, he could find out what it means to live in a nation where there are Nazis, Jamie, and they don't like Jews.
You brought up an interesting point just now. Both Chuck Schumer and Jamie Raskin are both Jewish.
Yeah.
And at the same time, both of them are fierce supporters of the money that's going over there. I mean, what Chuck Schumer did to you, to Diane Sayre, I mean, it was criminal. It
Is
was,
criminal.
you
Is
know,
criminal. Not was,
but
is criminal.
he's Jewish, and I don't get it why these people are doing what they're doing.
Look, Chuck Schumer, you know, and what I'm about to say is a position should have been pursued, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. He pushed for uh, amendments to the New York education bills that require mandatory education about the Holocaust and the promotion of the idea of never again, meaning that the New York school children should be informed about what happened to the Jews of Europe in the 1940s under Adolf Hitler, and should all agree that it can never happen again. Chuck Schumer pushed for that. Good job, Chuck. Then why in God's name are you doing what you're doing right now in Ukraine? Because if you believe in never again, it's happening right now, Chuck. The people who pulled the triggers on the Jews of Babi Yar are in power today. Their ideology, and here's the worst part. Not only are we sending money to help them, we just invited, the American people, because, you know, Congress is the people's house. We keep hearing that, especially when the Democrats, this is the people's house. This is the people's house. They just invited 4 Nazis into the people's house. 4 Azov battalion people in September came together with the wives of the leaders of the Azov regiment. And when I say the leaders, what I'm talking about is the people who helped form it in 2014. Every single one of them who is a murderer, a thug, a rapist. Literally, they committed these crimes against Russians. We know they did. And yet today we call them heroes because why? They're standing up to Russia. They're fighting Russians. These guys were taken prisoners by Russians in the Battle of Mariupol. They were released by the Russians and immediately paraded for the United States Congress as heroes. They held an auction on the premises of the People's House where they auctioned off Nazi memorabilia, patches of the Azov unit with Nazi symbology on it. They raised over $30,000 in the People's House, supported by Jewish Americans like Jamie Raskin, Chuck Schumer. This is what, hey, Chuck, you know that never again thing? Chuck, what about Ellensville? Chuck, what about the Heroes Park in Ellensville? Chuck, where the Ukrainian Americans have monuments to Stepan Bandera, Roman Shishkovich, and other Jew killers. Chuck, never again? How about it's going to happen again, Chuck, because you're allowing this sick ideology to manifest itself in American society, in public, not in secrecy. Every year they hold gatherings where Ukrainian American children are paraded around in Nazi uniforms, holding torches, sig-heiling things, and proclaiming their loyalty to an ideology that's founded on the principles that Jews are subhumans and should be killed. Never again, Chuck? How about it's going to happen again? You're a hypocrite, a liar. You're a disgrace as an American. You're a disgrace as my representative. This is more than just personal, Chuck, because I know you're the one who put the money out there, gave it to the Ukrainians so they could put my name on a list, calling me an information terrorist, calling me a war criminal, and putting me on another list that marks me for death. Now, we can say, hey, Chuck, no big deal, because those Ukrainians are far away. They're not, Chuck. They're right here in your state, right here in a state where you allow their ideology to fester and grow. You know, Chuck, when you put a target on my back and say Scott Ritter's words are worthy of him being killed, because that's what you did, Chuck. You put a target on my back. You're telling these hate-filled lunatics in Ellensville and elsewhere that it's okay to kill me. And this isn't an environment where violence is rampant in this country. Gun violence, political violence. You yourself, Chuck, get up there and cry about it on the floor of the Senate. Oh my God, it's so terrible, this violence, Chuck. I don't know how it could happen. We have to do so. The way you stop the violence, Chuck, is stop legitimizing the violence. Stop allowing people to be targeted for death because they exercise their free speech rights. And you're telling neo-Nazis, whom you support apparently, Chuck, with billions of US taxpayer dollars, that it's okay to kill people because you haven't spoken out against the death list. He's a horrible man. So is Jamie Raskin. These are the most pro-Nazi people in Congress, and they're both Jewish.
What's in it for them that they have this mindset?
Well, you know, there's an old philosophy: when you're explaining, you're losing. Politicians hate to explain anything. See, and it'd be very difficult for Chuck Schumer and Jamie Raskin, both of whom have wrapped themselves in the cloak of Russophobia. I mean, Vladimir Putin is evil incarnate. He's the worst person in the world. Jamie Raskin, was voted in the 2016 election cycle. Jamie Raskin is one of the guys that said, we have to impeach Trump even before he became president. We must impeach Trump because he's colluding with the Russians. Jamie Raskin is the guy leading the charge about Russian collusion, undermining of American democracy. Russia's bad. Russia's evil. Putin, 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 Putin. That's the whole thing. Putin, Putin, Putin. Blame everything. High gas prices. Putin. Putin gas tax. High food prices. Putin's food shortage. High anything. Putin did this. Putin did that. Putin did this. Putin did that. And so they've wrapped themselves in this. And now suddenly somebody's going, hey, there's Nazis in Ukraine. Let's see. Now, how do you explain that? After saying that Putin's so bad, Putin's so evil, how do you now say, but there's Nazis in Ukraine? Well, the way you do it is ignore it. And that's exactly what he's doing, pretending it didn't happen. And you know what? He's getting away with it because the American people have short memories. How many Americans are going to go back and find the words that Jamie Raskin voted in support of denying funds to the Azov regiment because it's a Nazi unit? How many people are going to hold the letter that he signed up and say, hey, Jamie, what about the letter you signed that says these are Nazis? How many people are going to do that? Instead, Jamie Raskin climbs up, wraps himself in the never again Holocaust remembrance, and then climbs on the floor of the House and says, there is no evidence that there's Nazis. I condemn you for daring say U.S. taxpayer money be used to train Nazis. What Nazis? There's no Nazis. And then invite those Nazis into the people's house. If you're not furious about this as an American, get the hell out of the country. We have people who died. Go to Europe. Go to Normandy. Go to Luxembourg. Go anywhere where we have these massive cemeteries with the crosses and the stars of David of American service members who gave their lives in support of the defeat of Nazi Germany. Hundreds of thousands of people gave their lives. Millions more were wounded. Millions more were psychologically destroyed by the horrors of war. An entire generation paid the heaviest price possible to defeat the Nazi ideology. And then we have people like Chuck Schumer and Jamie Raskin, either of whom served in the United States military, have no clue what it means to take an oath wearing the uniform to uphold and defend the Constitution, put life on the line for this country. They can't do it because they're cowards. They're cowards, and they're not just physical cowards. They're moral cowards and they're intellectual cowards because they are supporting something that is not true, that runs against the very grain of that which defines us as a people. We are supposed to be against Nazi ideology. We're supposed to be aligned in support of the people who are fighting against Nazi ideology. We did it in World War II, where we fought side by side with the Soviet army to defeat Nazi Germany. But today, we're supporting the Nazis in their struggle against Russia. This is insane, insane.
Well, I recently spoke to a friend and I said to her, that the government in Ukraine is infested with Nazis. And she goes, what are you talking about? There's no such thing. So the average American who really doesn't concentrate on this doesn't know it, right?
No, look, they don't. Randy Credico talked about this on his show. He's a radio host in New York City, a comedian, does a show. He's the guy who actually interviewed me and Roger Waters the other day. I got to be interviewed by Roger.
Oh, wow.
I mean, starstruck. But Randy talked about he wanted to go to Ellenville and go to the park and take pictures of these statues. But when he got there were guys hanging out, dressed in very ominously in hats and gray cloaks, standing there like this, protecting it. It's there, right there, America, right in front of your eyes. It's there. Go, take a look. Tell you what, why don't we all agree on a date and time where we're all going to meet at that park and march on the park. March on the park and see what they do. Americans who are against Nazi ideology, march on the Heroes Park. March there and stare the statues in the face. I'm not advocating destroying the statues. I'm advocating calling the statues out for what they are, symbols of hatred, symbols of intolerance, symbols of anti-Semitism, symbols of the very thing America stands against. It's not the hero's park, it's the demon's park. This is where the devil lives. This is where the devil's incarnate right there in front of you. And then have the press come and cover it so that Americans wake up and go, oh my God, in our backyard, it's happening. And then when they realize that the same people we now recognize as being the devil incarnate are actually the national heroes of Ukraine, with statues put up in Ukraine, streets named after them, a day named in their remembrance, where the crimes are forgotten. Look at the statement of the German ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany, saying that Stepan Bandera is an okay guy. I visited his grave. He didn't do any of that stuff. Well, the Germans woke up and they know what happened. They know what the truth is, and he got recalled. There's some people who are waking up to the fact that there is a Nazi problem. And we didn't have to used to debate this. Places like the Atlantic Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they all were running headline stories in 2018, 2019, even 2020. There is a Nazi problem in Ukraine. Ukraine has a Nazi problem, but not anymore. Apparently, there are no Nazis in Ukraine, and that mindset has, is accepted at face value by many Americans. It's not true. There's a huge Nazi problem in Ukraine, a huge Nazi problem, and we're empowering them with tens of billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars. We're letting them into the people's house. Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, one of the men responsible for the Maidan coup. He's at Stanford, very influential professor at Stanford. He's inviting the Nazis to Stanford. What does that say about the status of the intellectual and moral quality of American education system? We're one of the premier education centers in America is inviting Nazis in, giving them a hero's welcome, elevating their hateful ideology through mainstream status. Congratulations, America. We're doing a hell of a job promoting democracy.
I remember during the summer I went to see Cabaret at the Spectrum in Albany, and I liked it. And I asked one of my neighbors if he could get it to show in my building, because sometimes they have movie nights. And right in the middle of it, it kind of like the tape broke or whatever, and people were leaving. And some people say, well, how does it end? It hasn't ended. It's keep on going, right?
Keep on going. I mean, my God, what happens when in Albany, when you're out there having in the springtime comes and we're out there in the cafe, what happens when the little brown shirted Ukrainian American kids up and start singing Tomorrow Belongs to Me? Because that's a scene out of the movie.
Right.
And we'll all sit there and go, wow, that's just so beautiful. So beautiful. And in the end, when they're all standing up with their hands up in the air, we won't understand what the hell just happened. That's what happens when you allow this hateful ideology to become mainstream, when you invite them into the people's house, when you take them to Stanford, when you allow a park of hatred to exist in New York, where every summer they brainwash the next generation of Ukrainian American children into hating Jews, elevating Stepan Bandera, and believing that Ukrainians are the supreme race in the world. You're going to be sitting there in a park in Albany watching a bunch of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Ukrainian ultranationalist children sing to you in beautiful sounding voices with their arms raised in the Nazi salute. And you won't know how the hell this happened. It happened because you're ignoring the problem, America. You're ignoring the problem. It's right there in front of you and you're ignoring it.
Well, one thing I've noticed is Kanye West has taken an awful lot of heat for spewing some, anti-Semitism stuff. And, his backers are backing away from him, and, he's losing his income. But yet in Congress with Schumer and Raskin, they're allowed to proceed with all of their support of the, Jew-hating stuff.
I know. It's mind-boggling. But here's another thing. Jamie Raskin, and again, I'm going to say something that people don't spin my words wrong. He is a very progressive, inclusive representative. He believes in transgendered rights, LGBTQ rights, the whole thing. And I applaud that, Jamie. You know, in America, thank God we have people like you who are out there defending people, because that's what America's about. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with you, but I applaud the fact that you're taking a stance and you're standing up for something you believe in. Well, how much do you believe in it, Jamie? If you're going to sit here and tell me that you are going to condemn Vladimir Putin because of his stance on homosexuality and LGBTQ, and yet you allow the wife of a Nazi come into the People's House without checking out who she is. She heads an organization, I believe, called the White Hose or something like that. It's an anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ movement in Ukraine where they prosecute, persecute, beat, and otherwise terrorize gays and homosexuals. What do you stand for, Jamie? Not a damn thing, you hypocrite. You sit there and say one thing and you do another, and you allow her hate-filled ideology to fester in the American people's home. Shame on you, and shame on everybody in Maryland who voted for this guy. Shame on you. You disgust me, all of you, because you stand for nothing. Don't tell me you stand for LGBTQ rights. You allow that person in the Congress without even checking who she is and what she stands for.
Wow. So that's pretty powerful. Let's plug your blog and your book again.
Wait, let me take a sip of Diet Coke and calm down. Well, you can find this and other hate-filled rants from Scott Ritter on ScottRitterExtra.com. It's related to a podcast that I do with Jeff Norman called Ask the Inspector. It's basically a one-stop shop. If anything, you'll find this video and other videos and things that I write there. The article I wrote about Jamie Raskin was published on the Substack part of that page. Nothing in there is paywall protected. Everything is open to the public. I don't believe in hiding behind a paywall. But if you are inclined to support, the Substack allows you to do so, and it would be, we would gratefully accept it. But you know, it's there. It also promotes my book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. You can buy the book there, and if you do so, we get a little bonus for, I don't know what the proper term is, but we get a small little pittance by helping promote the sale of the book. And if you don't want to buy it there, then buy it from the publisher at claritypress.com. And that's about it.
So give us a little overview of the book and why it's important for people to read it.
Well, the book started out as a history of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was signed in 1987 and implementation began in 1988. This treaty got rid of an entire class of nuclear weapons, intermediate range missiles and short range missiles, that were basically terrorizing Europe with the imminent potential of thermonuclear conflict, and in doing so, terrorize the world, because you can't contain a nuclear conflict. If it breaks out in Europe, it's going to break out everywhere. But the weapons that were there in Europe, SS-20 missiles on the side of the Soviet Union, version 2 missiles on the side of the United States, they put everybody on a hair trigger alert. So any accident, any mistake, any misperception could lead to a thermonuclear exchange. We got rid of those weapons. And we did it at a time when the United States called the Soviet Union the evil empire, when the Russians called us enemy number one, when we had hundreds of thousands of troops facing off against each other on the East German, West German border, ready to go to war at the drop of a hat. Everybody today says, man, things are bad between Russia and the United States. I'm here to tell you right now, things today are a bed of roses compared to what they were in the 1980s. And yet, despite how bad everything was in the 1980s, we found a way to come together to work in common cause to get rid of these weapons of mass destruction, that make the world a better place to live and pave the way for improved relations. Now, we have squandered that history. Today, that treaty is gone, relations are deteriorating, and people are asking the question, how do we get off this path towards war? Is there a path, an off-ramp? My answer is yes. Read my book. I show you how we did it once. It's a template of success. We could do it again. This book isn't just about empowering yourself with knowledge about the history of the INF Treaty, which is basically an unknown history. Most people don't know about it. It's a fascinating story, well told by the author, by the way. But it also, I think, gives you hope, because you say, wait a minute, if we could do that once, you know, that saying, George Santayana, those who fail to learn the history of the past are condemned to repeat it. But sometimes it's not being condemned to repeat it. It's being condemned not to be able to repeat it. If you don't know that in the past we had this great success, that in how it happened and why it happened, you won't know that we could do it again. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already did it once. We could do it again. And this book, I think, would infuse the reader with hope, saying there is hope for the future, and that hope could be done through the vehicle of arms control.
Thanks, Scott. I hope to see that on the New York Times bestseller list when they open up the Times Union on Sunday.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes, it would be. So we shall talk again. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thanks, Scott. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.